Ron Mead, consumed by anger, flung his food away. He had been trapped here for a long time, shouting fervently for the butler to release him. He had thought he could restrain his elder brother, but to his surprise, his brother acted prematurely. Ron needed to stop his brother quickly, otherwise, he would ruin their family. Ron asked the butler to release him, appealing to the memory of his father. Regretfully, the butler shook his head. Looking at Ron, he stated that if his father were still alive, he would have already expelled him from the family. Had Ron forgotten that it was the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, who killed his father? The butler said his elder brother was currently rectifying this mistake, and Ron did not deserve the title of a knight. Ron angrily responded that his brother was blinded by greed. The butler shook his head while leaving, stating that even as a younger brother, Ron should maintain the basic respect. After all, his elder brother is now the count and the head of the Mead family. Having said that, the butler no longer paid any attention to Ron and quickly left the basement. Ron punched the floor brutally. Since Duke Ryan's defeat, he had become a captive. His elder brother refused to pay the ransom, and it was only the intervention of his good friend Petrov that allowed him to escape the prison. The relationship between the two brothers had reached a freezing point. Even so, Ron had no intention of disputing the position of the head of the family with his brother. Upon hearing the prince's plans to build a city in the Western Territory, he even considered going to the border town and pledging loyalty to the fourth prince, and maybe serving by his side as a knight. However, during a private party held at Mead's castle, he overheard news that the four major families were preparing to unite against Changji's stronghold. That very night, Ron stormed into his brother's study to confront him about the matter but was thrown out by his own brother. Ron had wanted to send a message to Petrov but was discovered by his brother and then imprisoned here. Ron recalled the weapons and the army of the fourth prince. No knight would have the courage to stand up against the fourth prince and his army. His elder brother hadn't realized what he was about to face. Just as he closed his eyes, footsteps sounded again in the basement. It was only when the visitor came to the side of the cage that he realized it was Aurelia, the third child of the Mead family. Aurelia had slipped in while the attendant was not paying attention. She had prepared some food in the kitchen for Ron. Seeing how much her brother had suffered, she felt super upset. During their conversation, Ron noticed that their elder brother was no longer in the castle. Ron's heart sank immediately. He asked where he had gone, but Aurelia said she wasn't sure. When Ron heard that his elder brother had left 2 days ago and had taken most of the guards and knights with him, his heart sank instantly. By now, including today, it was already the third day. It was too late. Even if he could get out now, he feared it was already too late. Aurelia, with a worried expression, asked Ron if it was true that their elder brother intended to harm Petrov and his family. Would Petrov be all right? Aurelia had always liked Petrov, and Ron had also tried to bring them together, but regrettably, it seemed that his friend had affections elsewhere. But thinking about these now was useless. Just then, through the thick ceiling, Ron heard a faint booming sound, followed by a slight tremor of the ground, as if something had violently crashed into the castle. Then there was another explosion, but this time it was much clearer, followed by short, continuous rumbling sounds, and the panicked shouts of servants came from above. Aurelia stood up wanting to go have a look, but Ron grabbed her hand, telling her not to go anywhere. After a while, a group of people stormed into the basement, wearing brown uniforms and holding strange long-stick weapons. Aurelia stood up and rebuked them, asking who they were and why they were intruding into the Count's residence. A tall, robust man stepped out from the group, asking who was the second son of the Mead family, Sir Ron Mead. Aurelia was a bit scared but still stood in front of her brother to protect him. Axe did not harm the siblings but introduced himself after saying that he was sent by Prince Roland, especially to convey to Ron that Mr. Petrov wanted to see him. Roland was in the castle, observing the firearms used by the rebels. Petrov mentioned that he hadn't expected Timothy to also produce such weapons. What Roland thought was that these couldn't yet be called firearms. They lacked triggers and firing mechanisms, structurally resembling the earliest prototypes of firearms. But whatever Timothy had made, by the time Roland's army launched their spring offensive, Roland's army would be equipped with revolving rifles, bolt-action rifles, and machine guns. Soon, Axe brought the Need siblings to the office. Entering the room, the siblings saw Petrov, who was standing respectfully to one side. At the desk sat a young man. Ron immediately knelt on one knee, and Aurelia also curtsied. Roland told them to rise and looked seriously at them. Roland informed them that before he ordered an attack on the Meade family's territory, Petrov had repeatedly assured Roland that Ron would absolutely not participate in the rebellion planned by Jack Meade. It seemed he was not wrong. Roland emphasized that Jack Meade, alongside the other three major families, had attacked Changgu stronghold 3 days ago. This assault resulted in numerous innocent casualties. 2 entire blocks of residential properties were burnt down, and, to force the family to surrender, they even laid hands on Petrov's family. When Ron heard the last sentence, he almost doubted his ears. He couldn't believe that his elder brother could commit such a disgraceful act. Cold sweat broke out on Ron's back, and just as he was about to explain, Roland gestured to interrupt him, stating that those involved in the attack would not escape the punishment of the law, but Roland would also not misdirect his anger at the innocent. He assured Ron to be at ease. There was no need to worry about the Meade family being wiped out. In fact, Roland had a question for Ron. With Jack Meade already deceased, would Ron be willing to inherit the title of Count and serve Roland like Petrov? There was almost no other answer to this question. Ron Meade knelt without hesitation and swore allegiance with the standard knight vow. Looking at this prince who had taken his father's life, there was no hatred in his heart. On the battlefield, anyone could have accidents, especially when the war was provoked by Duke Ryan and not the prince. After the war, this prince did not treat the nobles harshly but allowed them to ransom the captives in a noble way. Jack's actions were completely without honor. Moreover, for the sake of Aurelia and other innocents in the family, he must also accept. Without the protection of the Count title, they would probably never be able to live a stable life again. Looking at his friend who had lost much weight, he felt a mix of emotions, and after a long thought, he could only say to Petrov that he was very sorry. Petrov said it was not Ron's fault. For a moment, Ron saw something different in the eyes of this friend he had played with since childhood. It was the eyes of a leader. He felt some distance had been created between them. It was at this very moment that Ron realized that on Aurelia's birthday banquet a year ago, the two had already taken completely different paths. The rebel nobles were no match for the onslaught of the First Army. With the pace of clearing one territory a day, Axe successively captured the bases of the Meade, Wolf, and Rose families. However, when the troops advanced to the Maple territory, the momentum of the attack slowed down. They encountered unexpected troubles. Brian stared at the towering Count's mansion in front of him, surprised to find a moat there. In the last round of attack, 2 soldiers were lightly wounded, one hit by an arrow in the arm and the other in the back. But the injuries weren't serious. The soldiers were at a disadvantage shooting upwards from below. Even if the opponents only had crossbows and short bows, they didn't have the upper hand. The only passage was the arch bridge, but it was heavily guarded there. Brian said, if the artillery squad was here, it would be great to fire a few shots at the gate. Regrettably, the stronghold was too far away, and the snow was too deep, thus, the cannon couldn't be transported there. According to the intelligence they gathered, the Maple family contributed very little to this rebellion. Even the Count himself did not appear, meaning the enemy's strength was almost intact. If they all holed up in this fortress-like mansion, it was indeed hard to deal with without siege weapons. If the soldiers were ordered to charge against arrows, they could probably capture the place, but there would be substantial casualties. But Axe had to be responsible for the lives of these soldiers. After a long silence, he looked at Brian and said, "Please ask the witch for help." Axe didn't want to do this. He remembered the prince had once said that a competent army should be capable of completing tasks independently at any time. But now wasn't the time for stubbornness. To unify the western region within a week and minimize casualties, he wouldn't be obstinate about maintaining unnecessary pride. Because the prince also said, a good general is responsible for the lives of the soldiers. They sent messengers and asked for Maisie's aerial support. The next day, Maisie arrived at the camp. The soldiers on the wall saw a giant shadow flying towards them. They started shooting arrows, but they couldn't harm Maisie's skin. Maisie transformed into a giant beast, clutching a package of new explosives in her claws. She opened her claws, and with a howl, the package went straight down towards the rooftop. Soon after, a mushroom cloud rose from the top of the mansion, and in an instant, it almost felt as if the earth shook and the mountains moved. Axe couldn't help but recall the first time he witnessed Prince Roland trying out this weapon. But this time, the explosive power was far superior. After silently praying to the sand god, he shouted loudly, "All troops, attack!" Soldiers rushed towards the count's mansion. This time, no one dared to stop them. When Axe returned to the Canggu stronghold with his troops, it was the evening of the 6th day. The entire western region was finally under Roland's control. Petrov knocked on the door twice, and Roland let him in. Petrov walked into the office and placed a stack of white papers on the desk. It was a list of nobles, categorized by those guilty and those innocent, and then arranged by family surname. There were 64 guilty nobles, and 137 who refused to participate in the rebellion or were completely unaware of it. The highest-ranking noble in this rebellion was the Count Maple. According to Axe's report, this noble hid in a barrel in the basement after his mansion was breached, and when he was found by the soldiers of the First Army, he was so scared that he wet his pants. In summary, the 6 major families of the western region have become a thing of the past. Ryan, Maple, Wolf, and Rose families have no chance of resurgence. Halls and the Mead, although remaining, are also no longer noble families in the traditional sense. All the power of the western region will belong to Roland alone. Petrov hesitated for a moment before saying that the lists of the guilty and the innocent were all provided by Axe. Petrov worries that there might be any mistakes. Roland shook his head, saying Axe was proficient in interrogation. Moreover, Roland also knows that with Nightingale around, mistakes are impossible. With Nightingale's assistance, he can truly ensure that no bad people escape and no good people are wrongly accused. Petrov then asked how Roland plans to deal with the guilty nobles. Roland lifted his head and looked at Petrov, asking if there were Petrov's friends on the list. Petrov immediately denied it, just worried that if Roland executed them all, it might be detrimental to his future rule. Roland finds this interesting, asking wasn't it Petrov who wanted blood for blood a week ago, why does he want to spare them now? Petrov tightly clenched his fists, he indeed wanted all these people to go to hell, but even if Petrov strangled each one of them to death, it wouldn't change anything. If the news of the mass execution of nobles spread, other cities might also rise against Roland's rule. Hearing this, Roland was somewhat surprised. Such thinking is indeed the thought process of a mature politician, putting aside personal feelings and more about weighing the benefits. It seems Petrov has become more mature through this entire situation. Roland stood up, walked to the window, and told Petrov that he would inform everyone of what had happened, then publicly sentence all rebels in the center square, including nobles, guards, attendants, and mercenaries. The main culprits, that is, the direct initiators of the rebellion, and the villains with the blood of the people on their hands would all be sentenced to hanging, while the accomplices would be stripped of their titles and sent to the northern slope mines. This way, only those who have blood on their hands will be sentenced to death. And the rest would essentially exchange their titles for their lives. Once this news goes out, people shouldn't think the sentences are too harsh. After all, betraying the royal family is a serious crime in itself. Petrov nodded, then left the office. Their Highness the Prince is indeed merciful. Roland looked out the window, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never felt before. This operation had completely cleared the obstacles to integrate the Western territory, and from now on, whether it was enacting laws or issuing policies, it would be unimpeded in the Western territory. Roland wiped the condensed moisture off the window and looked through the blurred glass at the city enveloped in pristine snow. Changes will start from here. 3 days later, Roland delivered a speech at the theater of Canggu Stronghold. The crowd gathered in the theater was smaller than he had imagined. Roland first mourned the casualties caused by the rebellion and said he would be distributing compensation. Most of the people of Changgu's stronghold were skeptical about the compensation. Because previous officials were often corrupt, even the relief grain in winter could be mixed with sand and spoiled grain. But the prince's words still caused a stir among the people. Apparently, no one had ever heard of a royal prince apologizing to the public, but there was still not much response from the crowd. Roland had to let Echo use her ability to voice and ask some questions, but unfortunately, the crowd still wasn't very responsive. However, Roland had already thought of a way to deal with this. Axe brought a large box of gold and poured all the gleaming coins on the table. The reaction of the people finally became enthusiastic. By the afternoon, many more people came to the theater, the seats were all filled, and many people even squatted directly in the aisles. The verdict had already been decided. The criminals were brought onto the stage, kneeling in a line before the people, with armed soldiers standing behind them. Axe declared the crimes, Petrov read the verdict, and some of the victims' families, seeing their enemies, clenched their fists tightly, some even burst into tears. In the end, a total of 132 people were sentenced to death, including 6 nobles, with the rest being mercenaries, guards, and servants who had committed murder during the rebellion. The remaining over 900 people, although they participated in the rebellion, did not have blood on their hands, so they were simply imprisoned, waiting to be sent to the northern slope mines. The next day, Roland summoned all the innocent nobles to the castle hall. Clearing obstacles was just a start, but to truly rule this place, he had much more to do. The most important thing was to establish a new order. To soothe the uneasy minds of the nobles, Roland specifically arranged a lavish dinner. To his surprise, these small nobles here did not seem to oppose Roland, and in their conversation, it seemed like they all had intentions to pledge allegiance. After some nice wine and dinner, Roland spoke and distributed small notebooks he had prepared in advance to the nobles. As expected, a noble quickly expressed surprise, asking how the paintings in it could be so lifelike and realistic. Roland mentioned that these paintings were made by a painter who was a witch, and she used magic to draw these pictures. This statement made everyone uneasy, unsure whether to keep holding the notebooks or put them down. Roland told them that the church's influence in the Western Territory had completely disappeared, and they didn't need to fear. Moreover, witches were no different than they are, a point he had verified many times.
What did he say?
Hearing this, Petrov almost choked but quickly agreed, affirming that the prince was correct. The other nobles awkwardly laughed along, saying they naturally believed it since it was confirmed by the fourth prince. Roland realized he might have said something ambiguous. Acting nonchalant, he changed the subject to the Pine family, describing how he met Manhwa and Viscount Pine in the border town. Some nobles also knew the Pine family, some were even neighbors with the Pine family before. Roland briefly explained how he met the Pine family, and how they are now living in the border town, protecting the town under the new system. After the month of the demons, Viscount Pine would also take her daughter out for hunting and enjoy life. They sold their territories in the Changji stronghold and settled in the border town, where his noble rank increased a level and their family wealth multiplied several times. Roland knew that fear comes from the unknown, and the resistance to changes in the system is the same, as the nobles here are uncertain how the changes will affect them. Roland had Soraya depict the town life of Tigu Pine in the form of a comic, hoping to give them a more vivid picture of the life in border town. Some of the nobles knew about Roland's plan to build a city in the western region. A young noble asked, "What about their territories then?" Roland replied they would still belong to them. Roland taking back the power does not mean they would lose everything, and under the new system, they will no longer need to fight, and the task of resisting external enemies would be completed by the professional army, and they only needed to operate according to the law, earning far more benefits than before. After all, compared to dividing a small cake, it's better to make the cake bigger. Seeing everyone silent, Roland said maybe they didn't know how much benefit it could bring them since they hadn't been to the border town. In fact, the town's income in the second half of the year reached as much as 30,000 gold. If not for the early arrival of the month of the demons, this number could likely have increased by another 10,000 more.